simulation is so useful? Why is not there is more of it in use? And we have resource person as Dr. Elizabeth Lake and Dr. Anjum Nabi. And all I welcome you all in this session. I welcome to all participants in this session. And before beginning the session, I would like to invite Dr. Jigyasu Dubey, coordinator of ISAGA 2021, for shedding more light on this webinar.
Yes, Jigyasu.
Hello.
Frozen. The line is not good.
Yeah.
I think sir is now.
Technology does not always cooperate.
So perhaps Dr. Daha?
So, sir,
I think I can play my role.
Yes, I would like to.
Okay, at the outset, I would like to
invite Dr. Upinder Dhar, Conference Chairperson, ISAGA 2021, and Vice Chancellor of Shri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya, Indore, for the welcome address.
Thank you very much, Rupali. At the outset, I would like to welcome Madam Elizabeth, who plays a very significant role in the board of our ISAGA. You see, ISAGA, I attended first time. Though Vinod has been telling me for years that why don't you accompany me and attend ISAGA, but it could not happen. But last year, Dr. Santosh Dar and myself, along with Vinod, attended the ISAGA at Poland. It was a great experience and an opportunity to meet friends, including Madam Elizabeth. And we were very eager to organize ISAGA in India in 2020. But as we know, this pandemic, COVID-19 has disrupted everything across the world. So this ISAGA had to be postponed. We have postponed it to 2021. I am thankful to the executive board of ISAGA for giving us another opportunity to host it next year. And I'm sure that by that time, pandemic will be over and all of us will meet in India. So welcome once again, Madam Elizabeth. And I know that you're very active in simulation and gaming. And in this session, all those who are attending the program, they will be benefited. I would also like to welcome Dr. Anjum Naveed to this webinar. Perhaps I have not met him in person, but yes, I have definitely met Elizabeth, and I remember those sweet memories with me when we met in Poland. So not wasting further time, I'm sure that it will be a great learning for all of us. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now, Dr. Jigyasu Dubey sir has joined, so I request him to please shed some more light about this webinar. Sir, your mic is off.
Oh, it's frozen again. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You can. Yes, sir. You can continue.
Okay. Sorry, due to some technical issues, I am disconnected.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Dr. Elizabeth, life member ISAGA, Dr. Anjum Naveed, Associate Professor, School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences, CQ University, Australia, Dr. Upinder Dhar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Shri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya, Dr. Vinod Damlekarji, Gaming and Simulation Expert and Founder Mantis, respected Dr. Santosh Dhar Madam, Dean, Faculty of Doctoral Studies and Research, Dr. Anand Rajawat, Dr. Mrs. Rupali Bhartiya, my colleague, all the ISAGA members, head of the institutes, head of the departments, faculty members, research scholars, and my dear young friends. It gives me immense pleasure to extend you very warm greetings to all of you on behalf of Shri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya, Indore, India, in this webinar. Friends, International Simulation and Gaming Association, ISAGA, is a professional association for students, teachers, trainers, researchers, practitioners, and other professionals. Its aim is to promote gaming simulation methods, including research, consulting, learning, and teaching methods, such as traditional business and management simulation, games, policy exercises, role plays, computer simulations, computer supported simulation games, learning games, scenarios, dynamic case studies, experimental learning activities, etc. ISAGA 2021, the 52nd Annual International Conference of ISAGA, will be organized by Shri Vaishnav Vidyapit Vishwavidyalaya at its campus in Indore, India, between 6th to 10th September 2021. The theme of the conference is Gaming, Simulation and Innovations, Challenges and Opportunity. This event is the first ISAGA International event in India. To prepare for the conference, University is organizing a series of webinars on gaming and simulation with emphasis on the conference theme. Our key speakers are ISAGA members and other GS professionals. Our first webinar was conducted on 3rd October 2020 by Professor Sebastian Mayer, Sweden, and second webinar was conducted on 24th October by Dr. Ivo Winsler, Netherlands. Friends, today is the third webinar of this series, and the resource persons are Dr. Elizabeth and Dr. Anjum from Australia. Dr. Elizabeth is life member ISAGA and has Ray Page Award for Lifetime Achievement in Simulation in 2017. And Dr. Anjum is Associate Professor at the School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences, Australia. They speaks on if simulation is so useful, why is not there more of it in use? In this webinar, Dr. Elizabeth and Professor Anjum guide participants on an exploratory journey to discover reasons why the concept of simulation continues to be an essential part of human activity and also a problematic one. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Elizabeth and Dr. Anjum. We are grateful to you for providing your time for the third webinar of this special series. We welcome you, ma'am. I also welcome all the ISAGA members, gaming and simulation experts, faculty members, research scholars, and students. We truly value your participation and support for this webinar. I am sure this will be a very exciting and knowledgeable journey for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers in today's webinar. We have with us Dr. Elizabeth Lake, and Dr. Elizabeth Lake is academics working in different disciplines who share a passion for the experiential learning potential of simulation. Dr. Elizabeth Lake has more than 30 years as an educator and learning designer in workplaces and academic settings. As an experienced facilitator of adult learning, she has published 4 books and numerous articles and conference papers on learning and teaching. Much of this work concerns the use of simulation for learning and research. Dr. Elizabeth has worked in many countries and in both the public and private sectors in Australia, and her work is characterized by action-oriented and experiential learning for facilitating knowledge acquisition and individual development. As an academic supervisor and research examiner, she is familiar with the complexities of planning, creating, and completing research work at master's and doctoral level. Dr. Elizabeth has been involved with Simulation Australasia since 2000 as both scientific programs director for SimTech for some years and a member of the board for the past 5 years. She is also a member of the Professional Development Committee and is a member of the team leading the Human Factors Specialist Community. She received award in 2017 Ray Page Award for Lifetime Achievement in Simulation, and she is life member of ISAGA Simulation Australasia. We have with us Dr. Anjum Naveed, who is an associate professor. Yes.
Sorry, Rupali. I have to give Anjum's apologies. He has an urgent family problem, so he's not able to join us tonight, but the work I will be presenting has been developed by both of us. So I'm sorry for that. he sends
Okay,
his.
so on behalf of Shri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya and ISAGA, I would like to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Legg and request her to please start the session.
Thank you very much, Rupali. And thank you to ISAGA2021 for the invitation. I am a little daunted by the thought of presenting something like this for a large audience. And yet I'm excited, because when I saw that question asked of Subhas in the first of these seminars, it is a question that has been asked of me often, and the answers often remain the same, but the context changes. So I'm hoping that I can address some of the issues for each of you as individual listeners, and I'll be really keen to answer your questions as we go on. I've included some photos of Australia so that international visitors can see a little bit more of where I live and what I do, and also because the metaphor of a storm, of a series of problems, is often what accompanies the question that was asked. So I want to start with a quick definition of what simulation is. And Dr. Dubey listed many, many different ways of identifying different activities that are often included under the umbrella term of simulation. So it's a way of reproducing situations that are familiar to us or that happen more than once, reoccur frequently, but doing so on a scale where the number of factors involved has been reduced. So we are doing things in the small, which in life are much bigger. And for me, that is one of the key issues, because life includes emotions, it includes physical reactions, it includes thoughts and ideas and interactions. But we do that in the small in order to learn about it. And sometimes those small things can turn out to be very big indeed. So simulation is a way of representing the world. And I had a message today from somebody who is on the line tonight, reminding me that chess is an Asian game, that the idea for chess began, often it's described as beginning in India, sometimes in China. And of course, Japan has the game called Go, which uses some of the same concepts. They are all simulations, representations of reality, of the reality of battle between two opposing sides. And yet we reduce it to just the size of a chessboard and a certain number of pieces and a certain number of very highly prescribed moves. So in a way, simulation and chess are synonymous. So I want you to think about that idea of putting it on the board and playing out different scenarios as I work through what I'm going to talk about. So I want to say there are storms ahead, because simulation involves emotions and interactions, and teaching, of which simulation can be a very strong part, tends to downplay both of those or try to put them to the side. So one of the reasons why there is not more use of simulation is just quite simply that the emotional content of simulations can be harder to manage. Perhaps no harder than a classroom, but different, and therefore more complex and takes more time. And often when we're teaching, we don't think we have time. So why do we use simulations? It's a balancing act. It helps us to integrate knowing and doing. It helps us understand the relationships within a particular context. These two men are in Khiva, in Uzbekistan, and they do this extraordinary balancing act every day. Their contextual relationship with their surroundings is shown by the fact that the man on top is nearly 2 stories high. And simulations do the same thing. They give us a small picture of a bigger setting. We use simulations to learn about multitasking, being able to do more than one thing at a time. As I said, to examine emotions, to look at flexibility, to look at alternatives for action. The military, health, and aviation all use simulation extensively to try and plan for what might happen again, to build skills, to anticipate possibilities. And for the simulations that I use, which are usually classrooms with adults or young university students, it's trying to incorporate fun as a learning element. And it's about extending our capabilities for creativity. And it's always about getting that balance between understanding what we're doing in the real world and understanding how the simulation is a small representation of it. So, if it's so good, why do we avoid it? Well, there it is, top of the list, emotional volatility. I trained as a teacher, and none of my training introduced me to the idea that there were emotions in the classroom. I was supposed to be in charge, to keep the children under control. I could do that by making sure that they understood that if they made mistakes, it was their loss. And simulations remove all that. So avoid it if I don't want any emotional volatility. They can be unpredictable. Knowledge is not fixed. I ran a simulation one day that was supposed to be about communication strategies in a bank office. At the end of the simulation, when we were talking about what had happened, I said to everyone, "So what did you learn?" And one of the men in the group said, "Now I understand why the United Nations doesn't work." We hadn't talked about the United Nations, it was not there, and yet for him it was the most important piece of knowledge. We spent a long time talking about why he took that great big picture out of our very small bank office simulation. So it was unpredictable. I learned a lot, and he learned a lot about how knowledge can change. Simulations can be very intractable. We have things happen that we know happen in real life, but it can be a shock when we see them happening in front of us. They're complex, they're uncertain, they take up a lot of time. Or do they? They look unreal. I have a game designed by one of my students called Reasonable Force. He designed it in order to teach his military police constables that they were not able to use force. Now, they were all soldiers. They had been trained to use lethal force. That is what soldiers get trained to do. They chose to become policemen, and suddenly they couldn't use that. But when they were out on patrol, they were beginning to. So he designed a game. It's just a pack of cards. It's very unreal and very artificial. And yet I have played that in Russia, in England, in Finland, in various other countries. And every time I play it, it becomes real for the people who play it, because he understood, that game designer, that what goes on about our understandings of how to use force actually happens in our head first. And we don't need big weapons. We just need a set of cards that can act as triggers. They can be difficult to design, and they can be hard to manage. And I'll talk about that a bit more. And they demand expertise and skills that you may feel you do not have. When I began using simulations, and it was a long time ago, I made lots of mistakes. I didn't have the skills. So one of the things that I did was build a team of other people like me who were interested, and we taught each other. We understood that if we didn't have the skills but we wanted to work like this, we'd need to develop our expertise. But if you don't have that support, or you don't know where to go, then you'll avoid the simulation. I would add, much as I love simulation, it's a good decision to avoid it if you feel you can't find a way to learn the skills. So, how does simulation work? The storm's coming. It does not teach. It assists learning. Simulations never teach us anything. They create opportunities. It doesn't tell, it asks. It does not direct us. Once you're in a simulation, you do not know where to go or how to operate. Not as you would if you were in a straight classroom. But it encourages exploration. And as I'm sure you all understand, when you're at the beginning of exploring a new journey, there is a lot of uncertainty. It doesn't depend on the teacher. And there's a big issue we'll come to as well. Those relationships in the classroom change because the teacher is no longer in charge and the students, the learners, no longer have someone to depend on, because it creates a learning context and the learning happens all around us. And finally, not all the outcomes can be predefined. When you create a simulation, some of what's going to happen will only emerge from the action. I'm fond of saying to my students, I don't know what's going to happen. You haven't done it yet. And that can be a very puzzling and at times very confusing and even scary environment. So I'm hoping you're seeing the storm growing. This game, called the Gordian Knot, is an extraordinarily simple game, and it is named for the Gordian Knot from the story of how Alexander cut the Gordian Knot. All you do is stand people shoulder to shoulder in a circle, 12 to 16 people, shoulder to shoulder. You all put your left hand into the circle and hold the left hand of somebody who is not standing next to you. And when all the left hands are held, you then put your right hand in and do the same thing, somebody not next to you. And then you have to untangle the knot. Now, the knot will untangle in one of two ways. It will either turn into a large circle or it will turn into two links like this. But as you can see from this group, it can take a lot of time. So what's going on in a simulation? The essential components of this game, of the reasonable force game, of the game about the United Nations, all have only a very small number of key factors. You must have your briefing before your action and before your debriefing. So in your briefing, you will tell people, here is the scenario, this is the story, this is the topic, and here's what you're going to do. In the action, you let everything happen. The students, the participants have to create the action. It's kind of like improv theatre in a way. We don't quite know what we're doing, but we have to do it in a hurry. And once it's over, you then have the debriefing, you have the discussion. And then you draw out from everything that's gone before. What did we learn? What did we think about? The Gordian Knot is a game for communication skills, for building team spirit. It helps people to understand approaches to problem solving. It can also be quite physically demanding. So you have to brief that beforehand. Then you have to stand back. You can't touch the hands while they're involved. And then in the debriefing, when they sit down afterwards and say, what did we do? They have to be the ones answering your questions and asking you questions. Why did you ask this game? How does it fit in with what we're doing? And then you're asking, so what did it feel like to feel as if it was stuck? So that's the sequence. The things that are in every simulation, game, role play, scenario, experiential activity are these four things. There are always rules. They create the structure. There are always roles. Now, roles can be really simple. It's just you doing something slightly different, like this team was that day. You will be holding somebody else's hand and helping to unravel a Gordian knot. Or they can be quite complex. With the military environment, they may have scenarios and that include roles that take pages to read. For my preference, I like simple roles because I have great faith that learners, adults and children, can create in their imaginations all they need to know to do the role. So simple roles give them direction. and then they build it. The third element is the scenario. Here's what's going on. Here's where you're going to head. This is what might be the key issues. And then there's some kind of recording process. And by that, I don't mean what we're doing now with the recording on saying, the little red light saying, yes, we are being recorded. It means all of the emotions, the thoughts, the notes, the experiences, the photographs that went on in the process that can help you to unravel the learning in the debriefing phase. And finally, the other components are understanding that at every simulation, there are relationships of power, of learning, and experience. So that leads us to the question of how does simulation differ from teaching? Teaching leads learners in specific directions. The teacher knows where they're going, and the students know that if they follow the teacher carefully, they will all get there. Simulation provides a playground, and nobody knows the absolute direction because we're playing. In teaching, the teacher has the power to control, to direct, stand up, sit down, move around, open this book, write on the board. But in a simulation, everyone has power to engage, to not engage, to speak, to not speak. And that power is something that often learners don't really understand they have. It's there for them, but we can be so unused to having it as a learner that it becomes a blind. I don't have any power, I can't do anything. But it actually is there. And the third way in which it differs particularly is that in teaching, knowledge is the province of the teacher. I am the expert, and tonight in this format, I am an expert putting forward to you ideas. But if I could turn this into a simulation, as I certainly hope to in ISAGA2021, I already know that knowledge will be within the game and it will belong to everyone. So there are three really key differences. I guess you're beginning to see why I put a winter scene there. It can be very scary and daunting to face such a different environment. So from the perspective of conventional teaching, the roles of the teacher and the taught, that is the teachers and the students, become unstable. It can look unscientific. That's something that many of my colleagues have often told me. It's unscientific because you can't control everything. Well, no, but simulation is replicating life, and the reality is we can't control everything in life. We can plan for it, we can track it, we can explore it, we can discover it, but we can't control for everything. And simulations help us to understand that. The outcomes are not always going to be obvious. There's play, it's casual, people don't know what's going to happen. It can be hard to measure the learning. I have just finished teaching a program where I've used some simulation principles and some straight teaching principles, and the students have said back to me, this has been uncomfortable and difficult. But yesterday they produced their final group activity, of which I think they should be very proud because they worked through that discomfort and they now have confidence in themselves. And that's, for me, one of the keys about simulation. It can help you grow your own confidence so you're not dependent on another person with knowledge. You can begin to do your own explorations. It challenges lots of things about what is known. I like this quote and the storm behind it because it's a really difficult challenge when we think about all the formality of education. So I worked in universities for more years than I'll confess online. And I think education is an admirable thing, but it is well to remember, as Oscar Wilde said, that nothing that is worth knowing can actually be taught. We have to learn it for ourselves. So I'm going to play a quick mind game with you. I would like you to think of yourselves as teachers who are able to teach everybody else who is listening to me and me something that you know. I want you to think of something that you could teach all of us that you know about, You're not going to do it, but just think of it. Now what I want you to do is to work out for yourself that thing you were thinking of. Did you learn it in a classroom or did you learn it somewhere else? And I can't see you all. So maybe when we get to question and answer time, we'll see some answers to that. But when I ask that in a classroom, the almost invariable proportion is that 90% of the people in the room will put their hand up and say, what I was thinking of, I did not learn in a classroom. Less than 10% will say, yes, it's something I learned in a classroom. That's what Oscar Wilde is talking about. There are lots of things to be learned in a classroom, but most of the things that become important to us as we grow on are not taught in a classroom. They are learned through life. So that's some of the background, that's some of the ideas and the concepts. Now I want to move to looking at the structure of simulations. There are hundreds of models of how simulations work and what they are and so on, ranging from the big flight simulators that pilots spend many, many hours in learning how to fly the huge jets that are now parked in the Arizona desert, but will one day fly again, all the way down to my police friends' reasonable force. They have a place along a spectrum, and the spectrum is from closed to open. They're just words describing ways of thinking about games. In a closed simulation, the person managing the simulation does know the answer. There is a solution to the communication problem or whatever it is that the game is designed to help people learn. So it is presented to them as, this is a problem, how will you solve it? So a lot of those flight simulators are actually closed simulations. Here is the problem. You are about to land at the airport closest to New Delhi, and there is a very large storm, and you have a sick patient on board, and you have 90 minutes fuel time left. What are your options? What do you do? Now, there may be ways in which the person solves the problem, but there is always a solution. On the other hand, there is an open simulation format. This is the situation. What are you going to do? There's an unsolved problem. And the best unsolved problem I can think of, and they did use a simulation to try and test this out, is when Captain Sullenberger landed his plane in the Hudson River several years back. From the time the birds hit his engines and killed them, that's the engines and the birds, he had just on 3 minutes to make a decision, take action, and see if he could save himself, his co-pilot, and all the people on board. His decision was to land in the river. Afterwards, when all the people were out of the plane and there was a huge rescue and it was amazing, then there was a board of inquiry. And at the board of inquiry, they used flight simulators to show Captain Sullenberger that he could have flown back to either of the two airports that he was offered. And he watched the simulations up on the big screen. And each one, after the bird strike, the pilots went straight into management mode and turned the plane around and landed safely at each of the two airports. And then he was challenged, why didn't you do that? You had time. And he said, but I didn't have time. And they then said, why? And he said, well, I have all these other emergency procedures, and those pilots did not do the emergency procedures. So the chair of the board said to him, all right, we will start the count of action that the pilots can do 30 seconds after the strike. So the simulators take off, the pilots wait for 30 seconds and then begin their emergency landing procedures. And neither pilot was able to land the simulation safely. So Sullenberger had an open, unknown problem, and he decided that he could take it. Now, when we're creating simulations of that kind, what kind of problems, we have to be really careful that the problem isn't one that's going to be solvable in any standard way. We have to understand that every time we put people into an open simulation, they will come up with a different solution. Whereas when we put people into a closed simulation, they will come up with approximately the same solution every time. And there's a wrinkle in that. And the wrinkle is, depending on the kind of person you are as an educator, you may run all your games as closed simulations or all of them as open simulations. I have a friend who tells me she does not understand how I run simulations, and it is partly because she always runs hers as closed, and whatever simulation I do, including some brilliant ones she's designed, I always end up running them as open. So it's a model for looking at how simulations work. There are others. I find it a particularly useful one because it relates back to what you're comfortable with as the educator. Now we're heading further into the storm. The question at the beginning was, why is there not more use of simulation? All of this changes educational relationships because education as a form of transmission of information from teacher to student is no longer so relevant. If the student has knowledge, it may be that the student hands the knowledge back to the teacher in ways the teacher did not know beforehand. And then they have to discuss the relative equity of their knowledges. The teacher's pride in knowledge ownership can be challenged. I'm very proud of the fact that I have a doctorate and I have studied most of my life. So when somebody challenges me on information, I have to understand that if I'm going to be the kind of person that I say I am and use simulation, I have to accept that challenge. But I know that every time it happens, there's a little lurch inside me that says, I think it's all right. I think I can answer this. I think I can hold my pride. But I know that that doesn't always happen for everyone. So ownership of knowledge just changes. It's different. And learning and teaching are everyone's task. So simulation changes all the relationships in the classroom. You can see my signal on the screen. There is no longer one large person standing up with a pointer and a big screen and everybody else sitting down. So this occasion, this environment is one way of handing on information. I would say that if I succeed in my goal tonight, I will have caused you to be asking yourself lots and lots of questions. And I can see some popping up for me that I'll answer when we've finished. I can't do both things at once, which is why, of course, we end up so often coming back to this very formalized approach. It becomes too difficult. Although I am working out how I could do something like this in an engaging way. I haven't achieved that yet. So what happens to the teachers is that their knowledge has to be relevant. When things become unfamiliar, we can be feeling very afraid. We don't know who's in control. What is familiar is no longer reliable. I can't rely on my knowledge. And most simulations fail. And this is an informal data. I haven't got research to back it up. But I see so many simulations used for education failing when the person who is managing it becomes too challenged by what is going on and needs to return to the familiar grounds of I'm in charge and I know what to do. I will take over authority. And I encountered this for the first time many years ago when a colleague and I were teaching parallel classes using the same methodology, and her class became so demanding that she gave up, that she did. I carried on and completed the simulation. it was a very salutary lesson for me that sometimes things become too overwhelming and you need that authority. So if it's a concern for you as an educator, tread softly, play simple games, use the closed formats, move into the whole process of how to use simulation slowly. And of course, seek help. Look for people who can help you learn. So one of the things that I've learned is that as educators, we have absolutely brilliant radar about what might happen next in the classroom. I called it a prescience of bad omens. I begin to see when I listen that maybe I did something wrong. I might become the target of the student's anger. I needed to know more, but I didn't know what I didn't know. I no longer remember what my learning objective was because they've gone in different directions. How do I pull them back? Can I actually acquire back what I wanted them to learn? And since I feel like I'm under attack, how do I avoid retaliating? And if I'm going to do it again next time, what is it that I need to know? And what I am, again, it's not research, but when I talk to educators about simulation, these are so often the questions that come up. That if I was going back to do a different doctorate, I think this would be the area I would want to research. So the problem then is that teachers become aware that I didn't know what to do. So I feel like I'm in a strange place and I don't know how I got here. What else did I need to know? What do I do now? Again, what was my objective? And why did I do it this way at all? And to me, this is most of the reason. It's part of that fabric of why simulation is not used more often. These kinds of questions get in the way of actually moving forward. And when Sebas was doing his work, which is available on YouTube, he was looking at large-scale modeling of issues, of conditions and situations in the health environment where we know that we can build scenarios, but as we move forward, we don't necessarily know exactly which way to go, but we have some general guidance. And that's one end of simulation. We don't just guess, we don't just build plans, we build scenarios and run them and see what happens as we work them out. So the other question here is, what else was expected of me? Conversely, what happens to the students?
5 minutes left, Elizabeth.
Thanks, thanks, Vinod, I should make it.
Okay, thank you.
Learners are no longer on familiar ground. There's a great deal of dependency. There's an urgent demand to return that state, and we don't believe in our own feelings. But beyond the storm, there's the rainbow. These are the benefits for simulation as we learn together to move past those barriers. People become engaged with learning as a lifelong process. I was so excited with my class recently when I heard one of the students who did not know, hadn't realized that I was in the breakout room with them, say, I'm becoming more confident in how I work and what I'm doing. I love that. When you're working in a simulation, structured, oriented environment, and you hear people say, I am more confident, that's part of what it's about. You can share knowledge as collaborators, increase awareness, celebrate shared learning, and look at the links between theory and practice. So the final thing, this is a wonderful little Australian lizard, a skink, and he looks like he's asking the question, it worked, but how do I do it again? What did I do right? How can I repeat it? How do I build on this knowledge? And for me, that's one of the things that teachers who use simulation do most often. How can I record and build on this knowledge? And it's knowledge about skills of managing groups. It's not knowledge about history or economics or maths. It's about that whole process of working with people. So the books say it will be messy. Well, the books don't say it will be messy, but our heart may say that it's messy. Plans can go wrong. I'm not sure how to manage the process. Whoops, sorry. And then the final question, why would this be better than teaching? Because at least when I'm teaching, I feel in charge. And for me, the answer always is, when the students are learning for themselves, they are knowing more than I could have ever taught them. The teacher, at me, I have the power to use no power. I'm waiting for them to do things. I'm listening, not telling. I'm engaging with rather than teaching to. And my motto as an educator and a user of simulations is this version of a quote from the Tao Te Ching: the wise deal with things through non-interference and teachers through no words. And again, from the Tao, I think, or another Chinese statement, is that a good leader is one who says, for whom the people say when it's all over, we did it ourselves. Simulation provides students with opportunities to do it for themselves, whether they're pilots in simulators or students in first year in university or young students in primary school. So, to be engaged, begin with your end in mind, stand outside the action, know yourself and walk in your shoes. And I did have a game, but perhaps you might like to take a screenshot. The game here is really simple. Take each of those words and turn it into a formula, not a model, not a map, but a mathematical formula that tells you your relationship among all of those items that are on the screen. Because as you realize that every one of those can be related to in a different way, what you see is the malleability and the flexibility of learning and simulation. And that's it for me. I will stop my screen sharing and back for questions. So, okay. So, is it all right with you, Dr.? I can look at the questions in the Q&A. Lavish has asked, how important is the simulation for humans? Is that all right? I'm happy to do it that way.
I can read out the questions for you.
Sure. Okay, go.
Yeah. Well, first question is that how much important is simulation for human beings?
At one level, the military level, they say all but war is simulation. At the sociology level, they say everything that is not real is simulation. And then you have to work out what is real. Simulation it's all around us. And we often don't see it. For me as a human being, it is an immensely important part of learning how to be human. I can go and practice in a simulation and take on behaviors that maybe I'd like to do, maybe I never want to be, and feel what it's like. As I said in the slides, it's an opportunity. Well, it's actually the origins of it, as I understand it, is a prayer from the Sioux Indians in America. Lord, before I judge any person, let me walk a mile in their shoes. Simulation helps us do that in a way that formal teaching and most other forms of education don't. So for me, it's immensely important to do that walking in other people's shoes. Okay.
Yeah, there is another question that can we teach time management through simulations?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you one quick example. So for whoever asked the question, there are a series of activities that are called in-basket exercises. They work like this. You create, as the designer, a number of activities that would be logical to be found in the type of work that you want your trainees to become expert at. So a teacher's in basket or a manager's in basket or a nurse's in basket. What are the things that this person will be dealing with? And then you give them a very limited time to handle all of the issues. And of course, what you've built into the game are lots of problems, things that connect with each other that they have to go away and have a look at. So one that I have available is set in the Pacific Islands, and there's a hidden message in there, and you have to read everything and understand everything. And the hidden message is that one of the islands has a volcano on it, and the volcano has erupted, and you really need to get your emergency services out there in a hurry. But if you just handle all the items date by date by date, it's quite possible for you to miss the fact that the volcano has exploded. So yes, time management is and there are others, but I find in baskets really good because they help you think through, how do I find the connections among issues?
Yeah, there is one more, Akshat Agrawal. He wants to know, in terms of scope, he wants to have a comparison in terms of scope between simulation and sports.
Oh. Okay. One other model that I use for looking at relationships in simulations is a Venn diagram. And 1/3 of the Venn diagram is all the games, because games also in some ways are mini replications of human behavior. So football is still a bit like chess. It's two teams battling each other. Games are time limited, rule bound, and there's a prize at the end of it. There's a win and loss issue. Simulations are not time limited. You can make them last for days or weeks or 5 minutes. They have rules, but the rules are most often in a formal simulation. I'm talking about flight simulators here. The rules are much more about the mechanics of how it operates, not how the players operate. And the outcomes are not competitive, but are about what it is you've learned and how they relate to life. And then the third part of that Venn diagram are in-basket exercises and case studies, where you're looking at a set of events that you have to analyze and look at the relationships. For me, when you do that Venn diagram, games, simulations, and case studies, what you've got in the middle is a simulation game used for analysis. The military use these all the time. Health uses them. In their simulation centers, they set up an emergency situation. So there's some, it's time limited, but it's real life, and then we're going to analyze it. So it's part of the framework, but sports games are a very specific part of the framework. I hope that helps with an answer.
Yeah, I think so. See, there is one Parth Singh Jala. He has a question: why simulation is not taught in schools?
I have to say, it's part of how we teach our teachers. There is, if you go online and look for a document called the Sabertooth Curriculum, Sabertooth, one word, curriculum, second word. It was written in the 1930s. It's a metaphor for how we teach teachers and how education becomes embedded in society. And it says, there once were saber teeth and tigers, and people learned to frighten them by fire, and that eventually became part of a school curriculum. But then when the Ice Age came and the saber-toothed tigers went, and they had to learn different things, the school teachers, the leaders said, no, we still have to keep using fire to frighten the saber-tooth, because that's a teaching an eternal verity, an eternal truth. So people went away and did other things in life, but school carried on. In some ways, it's a terribly cruel metaphor, but But it's true. It's what happens. It was the teaching I got, and I look at teacher training now, and I still see so much of it. There's a need for authority and a reluctance to share that. I do, however, think that lots of teachers use games and activities and some small simulations in ways that encourage the students. I don't know what the next 5 to 15 years in education is going to bring, but I do think that slowly, inevitably, and this whole environment where we're teaching online and having to work out new ways of teaching, I think that may break some of the traditions. But I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've worked with a lot of people, and I know many people have taken it up, but I know just as many people who look at me and say, you've got to be daft to be teaching like that. You're not in control. How do you know what they're learning? And so for me, that's the dichotomy. I don't mind what students are learning. If the university says that they have to have this kind of knowledge, then I'll make sure they get it. But I want them to learn a lot of other things about managing life and so on. So I kind of work them together. But for some people, it's as long as they've passed the test, that's all I had to do. Yeah, I can't say it better than that. I wish I could give you an answer that's final, but not yet. The next question. Dr. Da?
Yeah, there is one more question.
Sure.
From Arjav Jain. He wants to know how to handle game addiction.
How to handle game addiction. Oh, excellent question. For me, game addiction means that the individual has fallen into a state, well, some aspect of a state of what the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. And to move that person out of that environment means making it too hard for them or making them bored. So I'm sure everybody on the talk tonight has played games and become bored with them. How do I know that? When you look, there are hundreds and hundreds of games that are no longer used. People got bored with them and we stopped playing with them. If we make them too hard, then we'll also stop playing. For some individuals who become really, really concentrated, they feel that they're getting so much return, so much emotional return, so much intellectual return out of it, that they cannot see that it is beginning to cause them a problem. So for those people, I spoke to a student recently, and he's a very good gamer and he's interested in it. And I said, right, what I want you to do, and this is how I made it harder for him, I hope, is I want you, every time you're playing a game, and he plays with international teams in a team-based online environment, I want you to think how what you're doing in the game is knowledge and skills you can pick up and take over and use in the real world. Because that way, you're actually making use of what you're learning in the games. So I've pushed it up into that harder, it's tough, I might be a bit anxious about doing that, so maybe I'll do less because then I have to think about how to do it. I know there are a few people who have become so physically addicted to games. I think that's a different environment. That's when it's shifted over to addiction, and I can't answer that. I accept that it happens. I don't think it happens to many people. But it is an addiction like every other. But for the most part, very few people go there because life is something we are actually addicted to, and the games are just part of it that move in and out of our lives. But that's an excellent question. Thank you.
Yeah, one more. See, there are so many questions. Your session has evoked so much
I'll
of
try
interest in these people. There are more than 250 participants were there. One question, I think we can take this as a last question because otherwise there are so many questions. This question is asked by Yash Jaiswal. He wants to know, then can we use simulations to modify human behavior?
Yes, Absolutely. But the problem then is, what are our motives for the modifications? So my police friend used the reasonable force game to modify his policemen's behavior such that they were not using force inappropriately. That's a behavior modification. But all education modifies behavior. Simulation just does it much more consciously, often much more accurately, and much more permanently. But school modifies behavior. You've only got to look at the difference between kids in the playground and kids in the classroom and see how schools modified their behavior. They run around in the playground, they hit each other, they play, they laugh, they come into a classroom and they sit still. That's behavior modification. So yes, of course you can use simulation. Almost everything human beings do to each other has the potential to modify our behavior in some way. Simulation does it more accurately, more consciously, perhaps more permanently. It's why military and Air Force and health use it so much. Yeah, great. That was a great question.
Thank you very much. So there are many more questions. This session has been so interesting and informative that many people have asked so many questions. So we can stop the questioning here. I must thank you for a very interesting and enlightening session. So like a typical very senior academic, you have explained in a very lucid and very precise manner. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I would be happy. I didn't put my email up, but I'm sure the university can make it known to people. I would be happy to answer some more questions. It's my passion.
Yeah, sure. We can have another webinar by you.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Maybe really after some gap. Maybe after some gap, we have another webinar.
Of course.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I invite Dr. Vinod Damblekar, founder of Mantis, to propose words of thanks.
Vinod, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Rupali, again. Elizabeth, you have told us, given us insights about lots of things today, about the difference between teaching and learning from simulations, about situations versus problems, versus games from situations and games from problems. You told us about a game called Gordian Knot, which I hope some of us will play very quickly as soon because it's very easy and simple. I know I played your equations game, I think probably twice. Once maybe in Dormin about 15 years back, and maybe in Thailand as well.
Yes.
Since we are in, this is a public platform, I need to admit that the reason for my entry into ISAGA was you. In March 2004, I had completed a review of your book on some 40 games or something like that. You and somebody else, and I sent you the review, and you said, "What are you doing there? Why didn't you come up to Munich?" I said, "Munich, no way," because I had not left the country at that time. I was scared.
Yes.
He said, "Okay, at least you talk to Willie." So I spoke to Willie. He said, "Come." I said, "I'm not going to come. I can't spend that much." He waived the fee and he said, "You must come." So that was the beginning, and I met Willie, you and others at Munich, and of course, as they say, after that it's all history. And of course, we have had a number of interactions here and there. Today, your speech was brilliant. Your presentation was great. I hope most of our listeners will be excited to take the simulation route to help our students to understand faster. Simulations, I think, deal with mysteries and confusions and curiosity.
Absolutely.
And wherever, and of course, it helps students to bring in what they already know, to combine it and create learning for themselves. I think this is something that, this is a great idea that you have offered today on a variety of, with a variety of examples. Thank you very much for having made it here so far. And on behalf of ISAGA 2021, I hope we will see you here again physically in Indore, in India next year.
Thank you, Vinod.
Sure.
And can I say to our audience, if you'd like to begin learning, take your friends on the journey with you and find the games, play the games as the learning games, as if they were just all the other games that we play, and enjoy that learning process. It's a lot of fun. And thank you for the opportunity. It's been an amazing journey.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
I'm
very much.
very much looking forward to India next year. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Upinder Dhar, Dr. Santosh Dhar, Dr. Vinod Dharlekar, Dr. Jigyasu Dubey sir, and all the
Sorry.
session on simulation. Thanks to all of you. Have a nice day.
Thank you,
Thank
Rupali.
you very much.
Bye bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for filling
Thank
in
you.
what I didn't do. Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye, Vinod.
Bye, Elizabeth. Please send me any files that left over.
I will. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod sir. Bye.